When President Trump took the oath, he painted a grim picture of America where crime and gangs and drugs are causing America's carnage, as he said. Well, it's a stark contrast to actual data showing that national crime rates are at historic lows. So which is it, and how are activists who are pushing for criminal justice reform responding?
Joining us is Monifa Bandele, Vice President of Moms Rising. Welcome back to BK Live.
Thanks for having me.
And Darian Agostini with Make the Road New York, who's active in citywide campaigns with young people around both education and policing reform.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. And via Skype, Asha Bandele, no relation to Monifa, the Drug Policy Alliance's Senior Director of Grants, Partnerships, and Special Projects. Hi, thanks for joining us. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you just fine. Okay. I've been listening all morning.
Wonderful. Asha, well, let's actually start with you. There's so many issues in criminal justice reform to talk about. We'd like to know, before we really get going, what everyone's focus is right now. So, Asha, let's start with you. What are your main focuses right now in terms of criminal justice reform?
Primary focus that I have at my organization is ending the drug war. We very much view the drug war as the above-ground legal response to the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. And what it did effectively was code switch. So when you didn't want to say Black people and you couldn't write that into the law anymore, you wrote drugs into the law and had people believing that anyone who used drugs, really meaning Black people in this case, were worthy of being incarcerated, thrown away, sometimes killed, many times killed. And again, here, you know, it flies in the face of what we know is actually true. We know, for example, that crack cocaine, which was considered this huge scourge for our communities, was actually used and sold far more on Wall Street, for example, than it was in white communities generally, than it was in any Black community. And yet it's Black people in this state alone, 92% of people who are in prison for drug laws are Black or Latino. And so it's really about, you know, identifying a group of people and finding another way to do what they've done to Black people since we were first brought here, which is control, confine, and contain them. And that's what we've done. That's what I'm seeking to end.
Thank you. Right. So, Monifa, if we're looking at this as a triage situation, where are you focusing first?
Yes, absolutely. Well, at Moms Rising, we focus on organizing mothers and parents because we very much see what's happening within the criminal justice system as a maternal justice issue. A lot of times when people talk about reproductive rights, they're thinking about your right to have a baby, to get health care. But we really feel that the survival of that child through your motherhood is as much a part of maternal justice as them being born. And what we're finding in our communities is that mothers are being denied the right for their children to survive beyond birth because of this criminal justice system, as Asha has laid it out. And so it's everything from broken windows policing, which is just the low-level stopping and frisking and ticketing disproportionately in communities of color, all the way up through what we've seen happen to people like Khalif Browder, and tragically also the children of Gwen Carr and Constance Malcolm, kids like Ramali Graham and others who ultimately die from their interactions with police. So we really see these issues as maternal justice issues, and we've been mobilizing moms to speak about it as such.
So two perspectives there, Darren. What are you guys looking at?
I think our main focus so far in this police reform movement or this fight for criminal justice is against broken windows policing. So I specifically mobilize and organize a base of young people ages 14 to 25. And these are young people who we know through stop and frisk were directly impacted by policies and practices that fall under the broken windows ideology, such as stop and frisk, where out of 6 million stops, young people made up 53% of those stops. Right. And so we understand that not only broken windows is a act of state violence, but broken windows is in coalition with so many other forms of violence like gentrification, right, and et cetera, in our communities that directly impact young people of color disproportionately to the rest of the demographics in the city.
So before we go on, just for 1 second and broaden things out, there are people who are yelling at their screens right now that broken windows is over. The mayor doesn't believe in it. He had his Black son out there saying it's not going to happen anymore. Bratton is gone. Broken windows is a thing of the past. We won the lawsuit.
Yeah, and it's just absolutely not true. Yeah. One things he has said is that stop and frisk is over, and we find that even under the broken windows theory, this idea of like ticketing people for very low-level ticketable offenses, that in our communities, people are arrested for these ticketable offenses because there's
deported.
because it's up to the discretion of the police. So in one neighborhood, when you're riding your bike on the sidewalk, you might get a ticket, and in another neighborhood, you'd get arrested. Another piece of broken windows is fare evasion in the train, which is actually the #1 arrest. Has been fare evasion in the subways, and that is absolutely a broken windows policy.
Absolutely.
If I could jump in, would that be okay?
Yes, please.
You know, number one, I'd like to say that thank you so much for that, Monifa. And I'd like to also to what Darren said, broken windows policing should be called, you know, for what it is, and it's a form of terrorism. It's a form of terrorism specifically against young people, right? So what you have here is a system where you've locked up almost all the fathers, increasingly the mothers. The arrest rate of women has gone up 832% in the last 20 years. And you have young people who are out here in the community on their own, with police given carte blanche to not protect and serve them, but to stop and frisk them and to harm them. On Friday, the Attorney General of the United States said that he was about to kick that back up a notch, that he feels that despite all the data, as you so well indicated in the beginning, with everything having dropped, he's about to kick that up a notch and use all of these sort of code words to again go in and harm particular communities. Because broken windows policing is not practiced at Columbia University. It's not practiced in areas on the east side where we know. My daughter goes to an elite and exclusive private school. And I will tell you that the majority of people who are using drugs, hard drugs, or what's considered hard drugs, are not black. Most of the black children don't use drugs at all in those schools, and yet black children are still considered the face. If any of us, even black people, close our eyes and we think who's a drug seller and who's a drug user, it's almost always going to be somebody black, because that's how we've conflated the two. And I'm not saying anything about people who use drugs. I don't happen to think that people should be punished for what they put in their own bodies. But aside from that, we are targeted without the evidence there, and others are not. So to me, broken windows policing, stop and frisk policing is terrorism against our young who have been left defenseless because their parents and other adults who might otherwise care for and secure them have been swept away.
Darian, do you actually see all of this getting worse under Trump and Sessions?
Definitely. When we have the Trump administration talking about bringing forth a national stop and frisk kind of program and re-implementing these really violent ideas, when we hear like executive orders mentioning State Law 287G, that these things are concerning for our communities, specifically for the organization that I work with, because we work so closely with undocumented young people, and undocumented young people we know are going to be at heightened risk, at heightened exposure with even the smallest, most minute forms of police contact, and that's what the broken windows ideology is about. It's about power and control. Like Asha mentioned earlier, it's about this code switching. So we understand like power and control is specifically targeted to certain communities, and those certain communities are communities of color. And so as we move forward with this administration, even certain things like fare evasion, the most minute thing that our state doesn't even consider a crime, it's a violation, it's something that is ticketable, can lead to the deportation, the arrest and then deportation of folks in our communities. So under this administration, think the tensions, the fears, the lived realities of people are only going to be more heightened.
And if I can just say that, you know, earlier you showed a clip of young people mobilizing against the types of policies that we're trying to highlight here today. And the silver lining, the hope, is that young people like Darian and the Make the Road youth organizers really remind me, they really have captured the spirit and the essence of the young people that we saw in that clip. So while we do see that things are being rolled back on a national level, I think that Trump and Sessions and that whole administration have a huge challenge ahead of them, because not just young people, parents, but especially these young people are not going to go easy. Right. They're not going to take this without a fight. And so that is like the hope and the silver lining, really inspired by them.
If I could add just further, I would say like the broader problem with this whole administration is the direct invoking of police in situations in our community. Almost the idea that our communities need policing is the continual investing in police officers and policing as a structure. When we know historically, like, the structures of policing come from slavery, come from way beyond the 60s, where again we had these ideas about how do we maintain the black community, not maintain in the sense of how do we make this community better, how do we give it the resources it needs, but how do we control and subjugate this community, how do we continue to criminalize and eventually extend slavery, eventually extend the economic beneficiaries of slavery from the slave plantation owners to the patrollers on the block, to the people who own convict leasing camps, et cetera, et cetera. And so we continue this conversation about policing, especially with this federal administration of power and control of law and order, what we heard under Nixon, what we heard under Reagan, all of these kind of power terms, these jargon-like terms that continue to reinforce the fact that our communities need policing and our communities don't. Our communities never needed a police force. Our communities always needed the ability to maintain the economic structure of our communities on our own, outside of controlling policing institutions, outside of institutions that systematically lock up and engage our young people.
Speaking of these institutions, I want to go to you for a second, Asha. I know your first book was titled The Prisoner's Wife, and you go into, at depth, a lot of issues that people who are at home and dealing with their loved ones being away. So we know Obama was making some reforms at the federal level on his way out of office. I wonder if you're heartened by that or frightened by the loss of any potential gains under this Trump-Pence administration.
Thank you for that, Brian. I don't know that I would say that I'm frightened. I would say that there's a concern, of course, but I have a powerful belief in we, the children of those who survived the Middle Passage, can also, many of us, though probably not all of us, frankly, survive this period in time. And I think that I'm hoping that Trump has so many other concerns of his own and indictments that may come down in his own administration that he will leave us alone and continue to advance the sort of gains that we made under the Obama administration. I think that's going to be monumentally important, because the reality is that we have examples of what worked, right? It's not as though, there's really been, if you will, two drug wars, and one has been a public health response and one has been a criminal response. For most white communities, up until very, very, very recently, the response to drug use in this has been a public health one. We haven't. On Wall Street, I can only stress that again, on Wall Street, at the same time that every single sort of social safety net was being removed from poor communities, which is also to say black communities, so you took everything away except maybe crack and guns. But there were no jobs, there were no parks and recs, there were no after-school programs, no music programs, no junior varsity. You go down the list, everything is wiped out. You saw extraordinary devastation. In communities where that was not true, and you had higher rates of drug use, you did not see people go to jail, fall apart, lose their families, lose their jobs, and everything else that happens when you take everything away. And so we actually know what works. And the question is, can we extend the knowing of that and get people involved? I believe we can. I think that we've done it before, and I think that we will continue to do it. We're an amazing group of organizers, advocates, and policymakers and policy pushers. They're out here, and I think that we have to stay on our game, because they don't intend to step down from theirs unless we make them.
Okay, well, 1 minute left. If we can talk about how we can all stay on our game to keep that.
Specifically, I know there's an action at 1 o'clock today down at 1 PP with the woman you've been working a lot with.
Yes, Constance Malcolm, who's the mother of Ramali Graham, who now was killed 5 years ago, has been demanding justice for her son. And we're all a part of a coalition that's going to stand with her today at One Police Plaza. The police department did find the shooter, the police officer who actually shot and killed Ramali Graham, guilty of not following police procedure, but he was allowed to resign on his own. But he was one of 12 police officers that were actually on the scene who have not been disciplined. I wanted to add another mother who's going to be there is Hawa Ba. Her son, Muhammad Ba, was killed by the police when she called 911 for an ambulance. And this is a piece we didn't get to touch on. But not only are police coming in for things that they shouldn't be, the police force in New York City is the first responders to 911 calls. So when people have a mental health emergency and they need an ambulance for a loved one, police officers who aren't trained to deal with those situations are called. So this is a very layered issue that we are trying to deconstruct and strip away. But please, if people can, tune in for the press conference at 1 p.m. today with Constance Malcolm.
Thank you so much.
Thank
You've run
you
us
so
right up
much.
into this is a phenomenal way to kick off our week, but you guys got to come back.
Oh, thank you.
All right, we're
Please
putting
do.
a flag and we're committed.
That's
Let's continue the conversation.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so
Asha.
much, all of you, for joining us. Thank you.
Monifa and Darian too. Thank you
That's right.
so much.
All right.